I don't know. I still don't know. I'm confused. Why? What's going on? I don't understand. I don't know.
I don't know.
What makes you happy? What makes you happy? What do you watch? What do you watch? What makes you subscribe? What makes you subscribe? Disney or DreamWorks? Bugs Life or Ants? Fox Kids or Kids WB? DuckTales or Darkwing Duck? Batman the Animated Series or X-Men the Animated Series? What do you like? What do you like? Let's go. Let's win. Cartoons, nostalgia, gotta play it. Play it hard, play it loud, play it until it hurts so bad. Gotta remember, gotta talk. Everyone talks. Everything talks. Gotta talk loud. Sick and tired of talking quietly. Pixar, DreamWorks, Aardman or Laika. Where does it all go? Where does it all go? Disney Renaissance, Disney Afternoon, Nicktoons, Snick, Toonami, Adult Swim, Call to Action, like and subscribe, shot to hell, fuck it all. There are several movie critics on YouTube who focus on a specific genre or medium of film. Some channels will only review horror films, and some will only review comic book movies, as they consider that their specialty. But the most prevalent type of niche critic that I've kind of become a little bit obsessed with on YouTube has been the cartoon critic. Centering critique around cartoons is an easy choice given our built-in experience with the medium. The first films that we likely watched at the theater were animated movies, as we millennials likely recall going to see All Dogs Go to Heaven or Beauty and the Beast. These types of films stick with us from childhood, as returning to these nostalgic pictures provides a comfort and a catharsis. You can still delight in those films for the familiar feelings that they unearth, but also be more honest about them from your added experience in film and animation. We've had plenty of time to stew with these films, so we likely have plenty to say about the golden era of the Disney Renaissance or DreamWorks' subversion with Shrek. But adult animation seems to leave some of these cartoon critics struggling to find the right words. And I suppose I should narrow this down, because I don't mean the simplistic stoner humor of cartoons like Sausage Party or Aqua Teen Hunger Force : movie film for theaters. No, the films I want to discuss for this video are the works of Ralph Bakshi. Specifically, I want to focus on his first three animated films, Fritz the Cat, Heavy Traffic, and Coonskin. Bakshi's films are challenging, beyond just being the trailblazers of the first X-rated cartoons to grace American theaters. They cover a lot of ground beyond featuring the sex, nudity, violence, and profanity that were considered forbidden from Saturday morning cartoons, a realm that Bakshi had previously occupied. These films address the open wounds left by systemic racism, the angst of a need for societal revolution, the corrupt nature of the police, the corrupt nature of the mafia, and an exaggeration that either aims to mock the stereotypes that have coded our culture or just shove them right back in our faces. How you feel about Bakshi's work, I think, ultimately depends on when you see these films in your life and how you view the world at that moment. I saw Fritz the Cat, Heavy Traffic, and Coonskin while I was attending college during the mid-2000s, and honestly, it was the perfect time for me to be watching those movies. I studied animation then, and there was a thirst for adult cartoons among my classmates. Adult Swim was already a late-night staple, Drawn Together was pushing the envelope for subverting classic cartoon tropes, and The Boondocks was proving to be a potent mixture of anime and racial satire. During that era, Bakshi's movies, despite coming out in the 1970s, hit hard for the subject matter and the daringly absurd satire that is just aged like a fine wine. I frequently hung out in the student lounge and would regularly play Bakshi's films on a TV with a DVD player that we'd swipe from one of the classrooms. Heavy Traffic was easily a favorite of the lounge, given that the protagonist was relatable as a cartoonist, but also because the satire just bit. We laughed so hard at the audacity of this film, especially the scene where a crucified Jesus confesses to the Godfather about some black workers touching his olive oil. I'm not saying you had to truly be there to get heavy traffic, but I do think talking about the film requires some level of revealing personal feelings and experiences regarding the topics being satirized. And sadly, I don't think this is an area that most cartoon critics can tread through without stumbling. So to talk about Ralph Bakshi's work and how cartoon critics perceive his movies, let's look at the videos of Saberspark. He's one of the most popular cartoon critics on YouTube with over 2 million subscribers, so his videos on Bakshi are sure to reach the most people. And to make my intent known, I should clarify, this isn't a takedown video of Saberspark. Compared to the other YouTubers that I've covered on this channel, he's really not that bad. He's not right-wing or anti-woke or a grifter promoting anti-intellectualism. He's nowhere near that level of toxicity. But his videos about Ralph Bakshi's movies are just not that good, and they're not good in a way that I don't think most people consider beyond a surface-level reading. So let's start with this video on Fritz the Cat, the first Ralph Bakshi animated film and the first X-rated cartoon to grace American theaters.
Animation, for a good chunk of its history, has been aimed towards children.
This might be a minor point of contention, but not all animation before the 1960s was aimed exclusively at children. And I bring this up only because of the examples that Saberspark uses to make this point.
The first animated movie, Snow White, was precisely that way, and Disney has continued that trend with their other films up to this very day, with many other studios who have copied their format. Fleischer, Terrytoons, Hanna-Barbera. It was very clear that animation had been pushed into a direction that was mostly seen as child-friendly and innocent.
The observant viewer will note that he leaves out Warner Brothers for their Looney Tunes shorts. That's a very concerning omission considering that there was plenty of animation that came from that studio that had humor geared towards adults. Now sure, some of it was a little bit sly, kind of like narrowly zooming over kids' heads, but some jokes were targeted directly at adults. And in the case of Warner Brothers' Private Snafu, the animated shorts made specifically for the military personnel, it was literally and only made for adults. And I'm just talking about Looney Tunes here. I'm not even counting the underground pornography cartoons like 1924's The Virgin with the Hot Pants or 1929's Ever-Ready Hard-On in Buried Treasure. I do find it interesting when Saberspark cites Hanna-Barbera that he used footage from The Flintstones, a primetime cartoon sitcom targeted towards adults, considering the sponsors that they had for that show at the time.
Flintstone tastes good like a cigarette should.
Not to mention there was the rise of anime-rama with adult Japanese animated films like 1001 Nights and Cleopatra, made only a few years before Fritz the Cat. So while adult animation before Fritz the Cat wasn't as prevalent or perverse, it was still present.
But before Fritz was an animated film, it was a comic strip and was created by Robert Crumb. Its first appearance was in the magazine Help in 1965. Crumb was really into the underground comic scene, as well as the counterculture community that was going on around the 1960s. The guy also took psychedelic drugs to help open his mind and craft his creations, with Fritz the Cat being the most popular. The stories were, unsurprisingly, about Fritz the Cat, an anthropomorphic character who got in over his head. He likes drugs, he likes sex, and he very much so likes himself. Yeah, as you can see, the source material was just as dirty as the movie itself, if not more so.
Okay, that's a very bare-bones way to describe Fritz the Cat in the comics, and I think it deserves some more elaboration than that. When defining Fritz the Cat, Crumb was all over the map with the character. Like, he was pretty much like a Looney Tunes character who would assume different jobs and take on different goals. In some comic strips, he'd be a hypocritical hippie, and in some, he'd be a pop star who would take his teenage fans to a hotel room so that he could eat them. And I don't mean that, like, sexually. Like, I mean that literally. Like, it does look like it's set up to be sex, but he literally eats them. Some have speculated that Crumb's intent with Fritz was to highlight the posers of the 1960s counterculture scene, while others saw this as Crumb's wish fulfillment for what he wanted to do in that scene. While Fritz seemed to be a rather loose character that Crumb shoved into various comic strips, most seem to be critical of how Fritz interacts with various counterculture movements, given the fact that he's, satirically mocked for his attempts not to be racist, for his attempts to fit in with the hippie crowd, and just endlessly pursue his quest for sex and drugs by any means necessary. It should be noted that Fritz is way more raunchy and unlikable in the comics. The film, for example, does adapt the part of Fritz the No Good, where he teams up with revolutionaries to set explosives as a political action. A big change from that comic, however, is what happens right before they go off to set off the explosives. In the movie, the revolutionary rabbit known as Blue becomes annoyed with his girlfriend. He proceeds to beat her up with an implied sexual assault by the rest of the group. The exception is Fritz, who tries and fails to stop them, signaling a disillusionment with what he's fighting for. The comic the scene is drawing from, however, is much different. How different? Well, Fritz is the one who initiates the sexual assault before the rest of the gang joins in. So yeah, I think it needs to be stressed just how much more dirtier, raunchier, and way more offensive Robert Crumb's comics are when compared to the Fritz the Cat movie.
All right, folks, you ready for a roller coaster of drama? I can't stress enough how wild this stuff gets. It is hilarious. Here we go. So Crumb was into the idea at first, but started to become more reluctant to the movie. Ralph is on the record saying that Crumb is, quote, one of the slickest hustlers you'll see in your whole life. See, told you, it gets worse. Bakshi producer Steve Krantz sent Ralph to San Francisco to get the paperwork signed by Crumb so they could have the rights to the film. Bakshi even stayed with him for a week, but Crumb would keep giving him the runaround. But something happened. Crumb had to leave town for a trip. And get this, Ralph got Crumb's wife, who had the power of attorney, to sign the paperwork. Holy shit.
There's a good reason that Crumb was reluctant for this movie to get made, and I feel like Saberspark kind of glazes over this. Crumb might have been impressed with Bakshi's ability to replicate his drawings for animation, but it's clear there was a concern over how the film would be written and directed. It wasn't so much that Crumb feared that Bakshi would make Fritz as a safe Disney animated movie, but rather that it would misconstrue the politics that Crumb had placed in his anthropomorphic comic. One aspect that Bakshi noted that Crumb despised about the script was the additions that were Jewish. The film briefly detours to a synagogue involving rambling rabbis, and the Jewish pig cop gets offended by his partner who takes part in Jewish traditions. Bakshi added all these aspects, believing that the comic lacked in theme and depth. It should also be noted that Bakshi's insertion of Jewish elements is treated more as sacred than satirical. There's also, this controversial moment.
We interrupt the Israeli-Arab war for this special announcement. The President, after conferring with the Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, has agreed to send more arms and equipment to Israel, based on the return of New York City and Los Angeles to the United States.
Which, yeah, you might have missed that little bit of dialogue there if you were too, distracted by the exposed boob in the background. There was also way more violence in the movie than in the comic, and the ending was so dark that Bakshi intended to kill off Fritz before relenting on a happier ending. Now, upon seeing the film, Crumb laid out much of the problems that he had with the movie. He didn't approve of the voice actor for Fritz, feeling that Bakshi would have been a better alternative. He also felt that the sex in the film represented more of a repression and not a genuine desire. This aspect is understandable when comparing the comics to the film. In the film, the sex scenes are over the top with lots of bouncing, squishing, and silliness presented in everything from how a crowded orgy breaks out in a bathtub to Fritz's slapstick foreplay of chewing on large breasts. It's sex the way a Looney Tunes animator would want to animate the act. The comics for Fritz treat sex, well, like sex. They're not overly exaggerated or treated as some Charlie Chaplin routine. It's mostly presented in a rather grounded manner that reflects as much of reality as Fritz drinking a beer or smoking a joint. But what might be Crumb's biggest issue with the film was the politics. Crumb made no secret through his comics that he was a leftist, and while critical of leftist movements, he never fully decried the need for radical leftism. Given the film's ending, which boasts a quote from a Beatles song, it was enough to make Crumb declare the finale as fascist. Where you fall in the film's level of adaptation ultimately depends on how you view Bakshi's additions. Because on a dialogue level, Bakshi's mostly sticking to the comics, even reciting familiar lines verbatim, but didn't seem to fully understand the meaning behind those words, considering the clash in the visuals. Going from the radical ideas of the Fritz the Cat comic to a movie that mostly smatters the 1960s counterculture scene, cartoonishly plays up sex, overclocks the violence, and crowbars in Jewish bits, and boasts a happy ending with a Beatles quote, is definitely a departure. I still like the film for what it represents, but from Crumb's perspective, you can understand why he hated it. Because for Crumb, Fritz the Cat wasn't just going to be the first X-rated cartoon theater audiences would witness, but their first exposure to underground comics and an encapsulation of 1960s movements. And it's an exaggerated one that for Crumb, someone who has swum in that soup for years, finds to be a rather distasteful reduction. Okay, so that's a lot, and I know all this is just in reaction to the contract dispute, which likely might have been just a case of percentages, but it's worth bringing up all that for the context because Saberspark doesn't highlight much of that in this video.
The suits from Warner told Ralph and Krantz to cut back on the sexual stuff and to cast big names as the voice actors. Ralph outright refused, and they lost their funding from Warner. Fortunately for Ralph, they were able to secure funding through Jerry Gross of Cinemation Industries. Turns out that Jerry was a grindhouse producer, so he wasn't timid of Fritz since he was so used to trashy movies anyway.
I take a bit of issue with how Saberspark reduces exploitation cinema to the descriptor of trashy, because exploitation movies were not always trash for trash's sake, and some of the films distributed under Cinemation reflected the greater need for films to be more provocative than safe. Blaxploitation, in particular, was a bubbling thirst for black characters from black directors, rather than make black characters safe enough for a white audience. This was the case with director Melvin Van Peebles. While Peebles had success directing more racially provocative films like The Watermelon Man for Columbia, he couldn't convince any studio to fund his more aggressive film, Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. No studio wanted to fund a film about a black man radicalized by growing up in brothels, brutalized by the police, and working alongside the Black Panthers to fight against the police. While the film is incredibly violent, sexual, and vicious in its depiction of racism, it reflected a boiling rage that had been missing from black films in Hollywood. Sweetback didn't deliver stern criticisms of racists like Sidney Poitier. He punched those racists in the face. Sweetback wasn't an asexual figure or someone who might fancy a girl with some sweet words. He was a sex machine. The film was clearly shot on a budget, and there are some choices in filming and editing that don't always work, but the thematic focus of the movie was loud and earnest about what it wanted to reflect about the black experience. After facing struggles to land in theaters and get around censorship, Sweetback's Badass Song is seen less as trashy cinema and more as a trailblazer not just for blaxploitation, but black movies in general. Like, trashy films don't get selected for the National Film Registry. I bring all this up because Sweetback was released by Cinemation 1 year prior to Fritz the Cat and was a huge box office draw. And while Cinemation was kind of known for more sexploitation films in the 1960s, the studio saw potential in producing films that Hollywood didn't want, but that audiences clearly did. Which is why I find it troublesome that when Saberspark makes the point of Cinemation being trashy, he uses footage from The Black Godfather, created in 1974, well into the blaxploitation era, that it's nowhere near as thematically resonant as Sweetback or as stylishly iconic as something like Shaft. That is to say, Fritz the Cat has more in common with the trailblazing desires of Sweetback than it does with something like the trend-chasing The Black Godfather.
Oh, time for some more drama. So it turns out that Crumb hated the film, despite making a lot of money from it. He despised it so much that he actually killed Fritz off in the comic because he objected to what happened to Fritz in the film. That right there is some deep hatred. He even satirized Ralph and Krantz in the comic too. Hell, he even sued to have his name taken off the film. Yeah, he hated the movie that much.
See, this is what I meant about Saberspark not going much further into Crumb's distaste. Like, he covers Crumb's hate, but not much of the why. And while we're at this point in the video, I might as well talk about the controversial comic that abruptly killed Fritz. The comic, entitled Fritz the Cat Superstar, frames Fritz as a big movie star letting fame go to his head. He drowns himself in expensive booze and has sex with every girl he can find, from wealthy women to young fans willing to put up with his aggressive sexual antics. But when he meets with his accountant and studio executives and talk show hosts, he's cynical about where his success has led him. He recognizes the box that he's built with his success, but realizes he can't quite escape it, reflecting a fear of fame that Crumb likely holds for his artwork. After a talk show appearance, Fritz runs into Andrea Ostrich, a woman who despises Fritz but is still down for one more night of sex despite how she views Fritz as an egotistical jerk. He comes back to her place, has a few beers, and despite her attempts to get Fritz horny, he can't bring himself to be the sexual deviant that he once was. The only thing that seems to interest Fritz is himself. He is more interested in watching his TV interview than having sex with Andrea. Unwilling to comfort a sad Andrea, Fritz mocks her silent treatment, kicks her in the ass, and leaves her while laughing about how dumb she was for inviting him over. Angered by everything that Fritz has become with his stardom, Andrea follows Fritz out of her apartment and murders him with an ice pick. Crumb's killing off of Fritz felt like a natural extension of the artist's own perceptions of what he saw in the world, as with his previous Fritz comics. He didn't like how the media perceived Fritz the Cat, and rather than continue framing the character as a critique of what he had become from Bakshi's film, he decided to end the character most fittingly. Fritz is killed off by the very desires of Crumb, a tall, big-legged woman who wants little more than to get high, get drunk, get laid, and rebel against fascists, aspects that have been lessened due to Fritz's fame. Okay, so at this point in the video, we're finally getting into the story of Fritz the Cat, the movie, and after getting through the basics of highlighting the character designs and the adult situations, Saberspark starts talking about how he really feels about the movie, which is really what I wanted out of this video more than anything.
But when you put the symbolism and social commentary to the side and see the story for what it is, it's not that good. Fritz isn't that fun of a character to follow. Like, I get it. He's an ass, and he's supposed to be unpleasant, but it just wasn't that fun or interesting to me. Always Sunny in Philadelphia is a good example of a show with main characters who are a bunch of undesirable degenerates, but the show is still able to have fun with that. You're supposed to embrace how much of an ass they can be, but still having fun with them. But for Fritz, he's just a pretentious, snarky jerk. Maybe the movie didn't want the audience to like him, and that was the point. But it made it hard for me to care about him and the trouble he got himself into. I wasn't rooting for him to succeed, nor did I really care to see what was coming to him. He wasn't fun.
I think this is where there's a big disconnect. Because, yes, Fritz is satirical much in the same way as the characters of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. But satire doesn't always aim to make characters likable. In fact, because satire aims to attack a target, you will find something more despicable in that interpretation on purpose. Fritz the Cat holds admirable aspirations of wanting to fight against institutional racism, but he is framed more as a poser for his ego and libido, getting in the way of becoming a more, leftist revolutionary. Now, there is a case to be made that Fritz's penchant for drugs and pussy could devalue the movements that he wants to be within, as that seemed to be a big problem for Robert Crumb. Where the film falters in this satire a bit is how it frames the darkness that Fritz often overlooks in his political prowess. Fritz invokes a race riot in the streets with his new black associate Duke, but in the chaos, Duke is brutally shot and slowly dies in a dark moment with his last breaths articulated through pool balls. And Fritz doesn't witness this grim ending to Duke's life. We do. It's a massive tonal shift, but it does hammer home the film's greater messaging that while Fritz might feign interest in certain movements for attention, the movements themselves were real and had consequences away from all the free love and drugs. To make that aspect more apparent, the satire has to bite much harder in condemning Fritz's phony nature while still laughing at his absurdity. Fritz also reflects this more prevalent aspect of morally ambiguous characters that had cropped up in the 1960s, most evident with the disillusionment of the American dream in the movie Easy Rider. Finding the humor in Fritz as a character comes far more from his missteps in embracing and co-opting political movements and ideas, and less so from him having a lot of sex and doing a lot of drugs.
Also, the side characters weren't that fun either. Most of them were only there for the social commentary aspect of the film, and that was about it. Very few of them were interesting when it came to being their own individual character. There were also these moments in the movie when background characters would talk to each other and carry on conversations that sound like they're straight from real life. Actually, I'm pretty sure that's the case. That Ralph and his team went out into the world and got permission to record these people talking to each other about random topics. And then they would take those recordings and then animate them. These sequences in the movie are fascinating, but they feel a bit out of place and are very hard to follow at times. Having these conversations were incredibly hard to understand. Still, I think it's pretty cool that they tried something different. But overall, the story for Fritz the Cat is more interesting to me for its social commentary, but not so much for the quality of its characters and stories.
These recorded conversations are, in fact, honest discussions that Bakshi recorded. This is most evident with the noticeable difference in the audio quality. While these scenes diverge from Fritz's other interactions, it does create more realism in this world, and in truth, this type of filmmaking isn't all that new. Jacques Tati's movies like Mr. Hulot's Holiday and Playtime would often meander into different scenes with different characters, taking the camera's focus away from the central character of Mr. Hulot. These films are considered great because of how Tati crafts a compelling world more than character arcs and intricate plotting. This is very much the case with Ralph Bakshi's films in general. He'll often spend time crafting the many corners of his world to make it seem more vivid and believable, often with rough and gritty edges. And yes, this does lead to several supporting characters being more present for societal commentary than, being given a complete arc. If you're not willing to read between the lines of what messages are being communicated through Bakshi's menagerie of social and political vessels, then yeah, Fritz the Cat will not be your cup of tea, nor will most of Bakshi's filmography. Now, I'm not going to diagnose Saberspark's perspective on this being shaped by anything in particular, but if you came into this movie hoping for something like the hero's journey or a lesson learned that would set Fritz straight by the end of the film, this is not the movie for that. I will say, however, that it does speak volumes about how the one aspect that Saberspark becomes most passionate about in his video is for how the tails are placed on the butts.
I'll tell you this though, I do not like the tails on the girl characters. They're coming out of their butts. Put it over their butts. That makes much more sense and looks much better.
Saberspark concludes his Fritz the Cat review by reciting the most standard declarations that people associate with it. That being, that it was X-rated, it blazed trails for mature animation, and had social commentary coupled with its vulgarity. He finishes his review with a visual gag for his disgust of the tail placement, which still it just baffles me. Like, I know that some cartoon critics get hung up on animation quality, and believe me, there are a lot of issues with Bakshi's gritty production to complain about. I'm pretty sure the tails were slid under the butts so that the animation could showcase more of the big butts, that Robert Crumb was really into. Not to mention, it would be more convenient for the tails to be tucked under instead of having the holes right in the middle of the jeans or at the bottom of the dresses, considering that tail sizes would further complicate the design of the clothing to a degree that, an entire section of clothing stores would have to be devised for. Do you see why I find this kind of commentary frustrating? I don't know if it's because Saberspark wants to keep his review fairly neutral to remain safe and never fully address the film's politics, or if he just feels like the topics in the movie are, kind of out of his depth and he doesn't really want to discuss them beyond just broad strokes. But the contrast in commentary is hard to ignore, with the film's history being objectively recited, the politics only briefly addressed, and the design of animal rumps taking the most passionate precedence. This format might be acceptable for someone who wants a bare-bones breakdown of the legacy of Fritz the Cat that doesn't really swing hard in any direction, but much like a polarizing jazz song, you have to listen to the points he's not making. So let's move on to Saberspark's coverage of Bakshi's second film, Heavy Traffic, which is personally one of my favorite films. Now, this review was made recently and many years after his Fritz the Cat review, so let's see if anything has changed. The review starts with another declaration that this is an X-rated animated film, though Saberspark is rather sheepish about discussing the film's rating from the get-go.
But what the hell is Heavy Traffic about to warrant such a dirty rating? I've seen it. I know why it has an X rating. I mean, could a movie like this even exist nowadays? I would start listing off reasons why it has an X rating right now, but I would get this video demonetized.
Are we really going to play this game? If you don't feel comfortable talking about Heavy Traffic, why even talk about it? Like, you didn't watch some dirty porno or heavily banned film. You just watched a movie with a lot of sex, nudity, profanity, racism, and violence. I mean, it has all the same stuff that Fritz the Cat had. So why are you introducing this film like you're a kid who snuck into an R-rated movie and has to keep your observations to a low volume in the schoolyard? It's like he doesn't want to speak too loudly or use any dirty words because he doesn't want to attract the ire of the teachers or, in this video's case, his sponsor of Raycon.
Before we start, I want to give a shout out to this video's sponsor. This video is brought to you by Raycon. Mother's Day is coming up and Mom won't shut up about it. I love you, Mom. I'm just joking. You're the best.
Oh, and I guess his mom as well. Like, you know, you don't want to use any offensive language. Your mother might be watching. After that 2-minute ad, we get the standard history read of the film. Saberspark tells the viewers how Ralph Bakshi directed it, that it was animation mixed with live action, how it has all the hallmarks of Bakshi's adult situations from Fritz the Cat, and then, I kid you not, just reading the taglines off the movie poster.
Here we go. Time for some movie quotes. Heavy entertainment. More spice from the makers of Fritz the Cat.
We get much of the film's history without much perspective or greater context. We also get the standard condolences for the tragic passing of actor Joseph Kaufman, who was killed in an accident before the movie debuted. Saberspark does, however, provide decent criticism of the voice acting in the film, which admittedly is hard to hear at times. Bakshi aimed more towards realism and attempted overlapping dialogue in the film's conversations, which made some of the actors hard to hear as they often ambled in a lot of their delivery.
There were even moments where I couldn't even, understand the voices. I couldn't, it was audibly hard to hear what characters were saying because it was so muddied.
Personally, I didn't find some of the inaudible moments all that confusing, considering the inflection in the voices that makes it clear what is going on and what is being communicated. Saberspark then starts discussing the soundtrack, and to my surprise, he actually does show interest in the thematic choices in the music.
The music featured in the film was composed by Ed Bogus and Ray Shanklin. And while many artists were featured, Sergio Mendes and Brazil's 66 cover of Scarborough Fair was center stage, being featured in the opening and ending sequences of the film. While I couldn't uncover why this song was specifically chosen for the film, I can speculate that the meaning of the song was influential in the decision. An interpretation of the song that I agree with from songtale.com suggests that, quote, the song conveys a sense of yearning and longing for a past romance, and the lyrics imply that the singer still holds feelings for their lost love. Scarborough Fair speaks to themes of lost love, longing, and the passing of time. End quote.
Now that's a fair assessment, no pun intended, as it does highlight Michael's frustrations with his desires and how the passage of time affects those around him. Michael wants to date Carol, but she's too intimidating for him to make a move, and his dad would rather he not hook up with a black woman. Michael wants to be a cartoonist, but his provocative drawings, which range from the psychosexual feuds to vicious criticisms of religion, just fail to attract an audience. In the midst of Michael and Carol trying to strike out on their own, Michael's father Angie has fears of his future, while his wife Ida wallows in the past of her departed family. In the film's climax, Michael's life resets to live action, where Carol once again seems out of his grasp, until he acts on his feelings of longing and makes a move on Carol, ending the film on a high note. It would be interesting to hear what aspects of the film that Saberspark attributes to this consistent usage of Scarborough Fair and how it amplifies the scenes that it occupies. But instead of going into any more depth than that, he just finds the most likely quote he agrees with and just points to it and goes, "Yep, that's my stance. No other commentary necessary. Songtell did all my work for me." By Raycon.
The film opens up with our main character, Michael, playing pinball in a game hall. I was wondering why pinball played such a prominent role in the film, and apparently Bakshi spent a lot of his free time as a kid playing pinball in penny arcades. Maybe it was intended to symbolize that life will pull you back and forth like a game of pinball, all set in the harsh city streets of New York City during the 70s.
Here, Saberspark comes so close to actually grasping the usage of pinball as a narrative device. Pinball, used more as a verb, refers more to the erratic bouncing and movement from place to place. This is very much the format of Bakshi's films. They don't stay in one place or follow a straight narrative line. Heavy Traffic operates under the same mechanics. I mean, it darts from scenes of Michael having a conversation about freedom on the roof with his pal Mo, to Angie pleading with the Godfather, to the cross-dressing snowflake seducing a construction worker, to Carol threatening her prostitute associates to find work on the street. The pinballing isn't just with the narrative, but the medium being used. The animation shifts from a traditional style to sketchy animatics to detailed animatics to surreal fantasies more abstract than exaggerated. Even the live-action footage diverts from the simple live-action scenes at the arcade to live-action backgrounds amid 2D characters in the foreground to negative reversed footage of live-action to create this creepy effect at the photography studio. The shots and sounds of pinball punctuate these many scenes to highlight how unpredictable and constantly moving life can be. That's ultimately what I took away from the film's usage of pinball, and I wish that Saberspark would at least settle on the meaning he finds most favorable.
Not that his parents are much help, though. His sleazy father, Angie, and angry mother, Ida, are constantly at each other's throats. Imagine the honeymooners, but they kill each other, they literally fight in the movie. They get into violent fights with knives and weapons and abuse, and it's pretty bad.
The clashing nature of the backgrounds of Angie and Ida is missing from this description of their conflict. Angie is framed as a member of the Italian mafia, while Ida is a deeply Jewish woman with regrets of marrying. Their feud is violent, but they represent a battle over which cultural background should succeed through Michael, which is why one of their later fights is whether or not Michael should lose his virginity to an Italian woman. So reducing their conflict to a murderous version of the honeymooners feels grossly simplistic. Ralph and Alice were known for fighting over stuff like money and not, whether their son should be raised Italian or Jewish.
The weirdest thing about this movie is that the plot jumps around constantly. It's honestly kind of hard to keep track of things at times.
You mean like pinball?
There was a girl who fell off a roof. I thought she was dead. She wasn't. And a bunch of Italian guys then start beating up each other while laughing and killing each other.
Okay, there's a major lack of context from this scene. The scene in question begins with Michael being hassled by his Italian friends. While they mock him, the naked girl Rosalind presents herself on a nearby mattress and tempts Michael with sex while highlighting that he's a virgin. In this moment, Michael is confronted by two forces: the men who want him to prove his masculinity by screwing this girl, and the woman offering him the chance to take his virginity. Michael slowly tries to prove himself by darting between stumbling over his words and literally stumbling while approaching her. In his attempt to have sex, Michael accidentally knocks her off the roof, leaving her dangling. While not having appealed to his friends in their desire for sex, he does appeal to their sense of violence. He cracks a joke about his accident, and his friends immediately begin brutalizing each other. This scene communicates two things. The first is that Michael is reluctant to sleep with any woman, as he ideally favors Carol. The second is that Michael wants to reject a level of masculinity that society has dictated for him by his peers. He weasels his way out of a moment where he's expected to fulfill the male stereotype of being sexual and violent. It's absurd and exaggerated, but the messaging seems pretty straightforward.
Oh, by the way, Heavy Traffic throws around the N-word a lot. It's pretty uncomfortable, but I chalk that up to this movie being a product of its time, that it takes place in New York, And, but still, as a white boy, I'm just kind of like, oh, there it is. There's the word. Different time, but still is a lot to take in.
The use of the N-word in Heavy Traffic reflects not only the New York of the 1970s, but also Ralph Bakshi's upbringing. He grew up in the low-rent Brownsville neighborhood of Brooklyn and in the black neighborhood of Foggy Bottom in Washington, D.C. Despite the segregation at the time in Foggy Bottom, Bakshi integrated himself into a community where he had black friends and girlfriends and attempted to attend an all-black school. After returning to Brooklyn, Bakshi would also be taught about cartoons by the black animator Charles Allen. All of this is to say that Bakshi had a background rooted in the black community where the N-word was likely used with frequency. This is not to say, however, that Bakshi somehow has the fictitious N-word pass to use the word freely without criticism, but part of what Bakshi wanted to frame in Heavy Traffic was a realism that often gets glossed over in cartoons. The framing of the N-word also matters a lot in this film, as Michael will use it more endearingly around his black associates, while flat-out racists like Angie will use it in a derogatory way meant to be disgusting. I'm not trying to suggest that the prevalence of political correctness has made this film inaccessible for this generation that takes a firmer objection to racist language. But there's a distinction that needs to be drawn. Heavy Traffic doesn't just use the N-word for edgy jokes. I mean, it paints a complete picture of the racial divide and overlap that makes up this cartoon world meant to reflect reality. And reality is uncomfortable. There was racism, sexism, queer discrimination, police brutality, political corruption, and vicious violence in New York City. Throughout the film, Michael constantly tries to escape reality through his cartoons and going to the movies, but the hideous elements of this world still leak into his escapism. So if the common vernacular of Michael's urban environment makes you uncomfortable, I think it might be worth noting why it makes you feel that way and what it reflects about your own upbringing when compared to Ralph's. That might be asking a lot from Saberspark, though, so he kind of takes the easy route by just declaring the film as being from a different time, which, you know, that's a simple assessment, but you know what? Fair. At this point in the video, Saberspark just seems lost in trying to decipher the film, so he retreats to a video review style that I really hate, you know, just giving a blow-by-blow of the entire plot.
Group of bullies harass him into hooking up with a red-haired woman who looks like Wendy's from the restaurant Wendy's. Italian boys start beating each other up and killing each other and laughing. Maybe it's supposed to represent masculinity? I don't know. Michael then meets an even more colorful character cast at a bar. She likes his art and gives Michael free drinks in exchange for his drawings. A fight ensues when Snowflake flirts with a random guy, and the random guy finds out who Snowflake really is after a long, crude scene of feeling each other up.
I think Saberspark is taking this route in hopes of trying to better understand the plot, but even when he does manage to spell it out, he's still confused.
Carol gets fired for giving Michael free drinks. Then they spend the rest of the movie mostly hanging out and trying to find ways to make ends meet. Like, it's kind of super unclear what's happening here.
It's not that confusing. Like, you kind of laid the general story out in your last descriptor. The film's overall plot involves Michael trying to woo Carol and find money to live on his own with her. I mean, that's the main character's desire. That's what propels him through each scene and what affects the lives of the other characters around him. It's really not that dense. I mean, the film isn't trying to be something as esoteric as Lost Highway or The Holy Mountain. So the plot synopsis continues, occasionally stopping to either point out what is offensive or be confused by the thematic staging.
And right when I thought we might have a wholesome moment, we get a full music video portraying crude racist stereotypes. I'll probably have to blur most of this scene too, just because it keeps going. It just keeps going. Imagine putting a random music video into the middle of your movie that's barely animated. Like, it's just keyframes. The only potential positive I could give it is that maybe this scene reflects the musical inspiration for something Michael created. But even then, I don't know. To me, it looks very racist the way it plays out. But maybe that's the point. I don't know. It's hard to say with Ralph.
I can't stress enough just how aggravating it is, how many times Saberspark keeps assessing scenes with the conclusion of, I don't know. I still don't know. I'm confused. Why? What's going on? I don't understand. I don't know.
I don't know.
Well, what do you know? I mean, what can you tell us that a plot synopsis on Wikipedia cannot? I mean, did you even like a scene in the film?
Carol convinces Michael to sell his drawings by pitching them as a religious script to an old man in the hospital. This scene's great, by the way. This is my favorite scene in the movie. Because the old man, represents, play it safe, money, 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 capitalism.
Jesus has always been in good style. That will sell, that will sell.
Michael takes out a drawing and describes it to the old guy, who ends up dying because the idea was just too radical. He literally killed this man by showing him his OCs.
Okay, at least he has something more substantial to say here. I don't like how he completely overlooks the satire of religion that Michael displays for this producer, but whatever, it's fine, I guess. At least it's a break from being confused and refusing to engage with the storytelling.
The vibe of this movie at every turn is that nothing actually happens and is just noise, sex, and racism, with a little bit of death for good measure. Well, that's a treat.
Nothing happens? Is this film really that hard for you to follow? Michael wants to sell his cartoons, Carol gets fired from her job, Carol stays at Michael's apartment, Michael and Carol get kicked out for their interracial romance, they try to make ends meet, and Angie tries to order a hit on his son after the mafia denies him this request. Things are happening in this film. It's not random. Sure, there are detours of sex and violence, but the overall story is not that hard to follow. I don't want to be mean here. I don't want to call Saberspark dumb, but I'm sorry. If you come out of heavy traffic and your assessment is that nothing happens, I don't think you're really watching the movie beyond a surface level.
The movie is overhead of money, time to do live action, because it suddenly cuts to an angry live action Michael destroying the pinball machine. He leaves the game hall and walks the streets alone until running into a woman who looks exactly like Carol. They go their separate ways after a yelling match. He then runs back to her. They fight on and off in front of street musicians, dancing until the credits then roll. I don't understand, and that's the end of the movie.
Can you just try? Can you try to fathom what the film might be saying? Okay, fine. You know what? I hate to do this, but I'm just going to spell out the ending here. The entire animation of the film has existed up to this point as a fantasy within the mind of Michael while playing pinball. After getting a tilt while playing, that fantasy ends. The thought still lingers of Michael being gunned down for his romantic relationship with Carol. When he runs into his crush, the real-life Carol, he's blown off and retreats back to his apartment. But when arriving at his apartment, he realizes that the risk is worth it and runs back to Carol in the park. They fight for a bit and ultimately end up dancing together joyfully, signaling that their love is worth taking a risk on, no matter what dark thoughts you might have about pursuing the girl that you fancy. It's really not that dense. I can't stress that enough here.
So what are my overall thoughts about this film? There could honestly be a multitude of interpretations of this movie because it jumps all over the place. However, for me, I've narrowed it down to these things: escapism and the absurd nature of reality. And also a bit of what New York was during the 1970s, during this downtrodden point of its history.
It honestly kind of baffles me how Saberspark can arrive at this conclusion, yet still be confused by nearly every scene in the film.
Why pinball played such a prominent role in the film? And apparently, again, Bakshi spent a lot of time as a kid playing pinball in the penny arcades. So I think that is the reason. It's supposed to symbolize that life of Ralph. And how, maybe it's a bit more of a carefree time during his, youth, and maybe how life will pull you back and forth like a game of pinball, all set in the harsh city streets of New York City. Or perhaps it is his fantasy on autopilot, imagining what the world must be like outside of his pinball playing escapades.
Wait, hold on. That's actually accurate. I don't understand Saberspark. I don't get how he can go through the entire film constantly saying that he doesn't understand any of this, and then stating that the pinball game signifies the nature of New York life and Michael's cartoon fantasy. It's almost enough to make me believe that Saberspark does understand what the film is doing, but lacks confidence in his assessment.
I couldn't keep count of the amount of times genitals appear on the screen. And for no reason, too.
Okay, I can't be the only one who has asked this question, but why were you keeping track of how many genitals there were on the screen? Like, is that a review metric for you?
Again, a huge content warning for the amount of slurs thrown around. This was certainly a time capsule in its own right, but depending on how you view it, the language in this movie really hasn't aged that well. Though Ralph was like quite the radical back in the day, definitely one of those cool art guys who was like, the man, watch Fritz the Cat and you'll understand that. So I don't think Ralph was trying to be like a bigot. I think he was just trying to be hip with it. That's my assessment of this movie and its colorful language.
It's just bizarre to me how Saberspark can find the association with pinball tracing to Ralph's childhood, but somehow miss the part about Ralph growing up in a predominantly black community, where racial slurs were used both affectionately and pejoratively. It feels really disingenuous to say that Bakshi made his choices with the script more out of a desire to be hip instead of reflecting the reality that he lived in.
And aside from a few small moments, there is really never a consistent flow with the story and characters. The cuts between scenes were interesting and very creepy, but it didn't really contribute anything to the story. I know that that's deliberate, but I still ask myself, what was the point?
The point was to paint a picture of inner city life that has been manufactured by conspiring forces of racism, gang violence, ethnic identity, stifled creativity, and the decay of capitalism, all contributing to making aspirations of love and passion tricky. And sure, that's only my interpretation, as there are several other perspectives that you could have on this film, but hey, at least I have one.
It didn't make sense, but there's a lot of charm to this film. It's not perfect. I wish it could have been a bit more connected with its story beats, but overall, I give it an A+ for effort.
What is this criticism? Did you like the movie or not? What did you think it was saying? This review is frustratingly standoffish and just fails to make any cohesive points. I'm sorry, but if you come out of Heavy Traffic and your only reaction is just kind of a shrug, it really seems like you haven't thought about the film that much.
So in conclusion, would I recommend Heavy Traffic? If you're an animation buff, if you like animation history, then sure, check out Heavy Traffic. Just, heads up as a bit of a content warning. But as far as when it comes to a quality film, I wouldn't really recommend Heavy Traffic. There are things to like about this movie, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's a good movie. It's more of a conversation piece or history.
I really don't like this assessment of the film. Saberspark's description of Heavy Traffic makes it sound like a film that doesn't hold up well over time. But when I watched this movie with a crowd of my 20-something peers in 2005, it still entertained rather well. Sure, it does have a lot of references and vernacular that were more vocal and common in the 1970s, but the overall intent behind the film and what it reflects of the era resonates rather strongly for its blunt earnestness coupled with vulgarity.
Though there are many critics who love Heavy Traffic and see it as this obscene masterpiece. So hey, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm stupid, probably.
Okay, I'm gonna do something that Saberspark wasn't willing to do in this video and actually go into the critic reviews of this film. Newsweek declared the film a, quote, celebration of urban decay, which is very astute for the material that's being invoked here. Charles Champlin of the Los Angeles Times wrote about the film being a trailblazer by stating, quote, Heavy Traffic is, in its furious energy, uncomfortable to watch as often as it is hilarious. And to be fair, let's actually draw from some reviews in the 21st century. Jay Cook of Time magazine wrote, quote, Heavy Traffic not only has an authentic tenement toughness, but the rough feeling of an unassimilated autobiography of experiences and fantasies still keenly felt. Keith Phillips of The Dissolve wrote, quote, it's a downbeat, dark fantasia of urban life from a filmmaker trying to understand the darkness of the moment before it slipped away. At the risk of being reductive, it seems like most critics appreciated Heavy Traffic for being so reflective as a rare portrait of inner city life that hadn't been seen in animation before. The genuine nature carried well, considering how much I dug the film for living in the city during the mid-2000s. And Saberspark, if you disagree with these positive reviews, I'd honestly love to hear your thoughts on this. I really would.
But as far as Heavy Traffic being a quality movie on its own, I think that's still out for debate. But hey, those are just my thoughts. What did you all think? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you all next time.
No, I already know what I think of Heavy Traffic, Saberspark. I clicked on your video to hear your thoughts, and it sounds like it was mostly an unwillingness to approach the film's more controversial subject matter. Like, if you really love cartoon history that much, why didn't you go into any of that with Heavy Traffic? I'm not even talking about the societal aspects built up over time that coded the picture's narrative. I just mean the general production history. I mean, you had no problem telling people about the feud between Bakshi and Crumb for Fritz the Cat, but you won't even touch the equally bitter bout between Bakshi and Krantz over the production of Heavy Traffic? And that's where Saberspark's review of Heavy Traffic ends. Just a very nothing review that recounts the plot and offers up very limited insight or criticism. It's just so frustrating to see a review of Heavy Traffic, one of my favorite Ralph Bakshi films, just, saying nothing. I would like to see how Saberspark tackles Coonskin based on his reviews of Fritz the Cat and Heavy Traffic. I'm especially curious about how Saberspark takes issue with the racial slurs, and how Coonskin opens with a musical number in which the N-word is abundant. Not to mention the film is highly overt in its depiction of inner-city gang life, the racist corruption that built this landscape, and the unmistakable personification of America as a luring figure that brutalizes Black Americans who fall for her promises of dreams and prosperity. But from what I could find on Saberspark's channel, I don't think he's covered Coonskin. To the best of my knowledge. I mean, I haven't checked, his Patreon or anything like that. So for this particular film, let's look at some other cartoon reviewers and what they have to say about Coonskin. One of the few Coonskin reviews I found was from Media Hunter, a reviewer who performs as a night elf from World of Warcraft. I'll skip the critique of his Warcraft pageantry and just get right into the key points of his review. And I have to warn you, this is a massive step down from Saberspark.
Hello everyone! Today, we look at Coonskin. Yes, we're finally looking at something made by Ralph Bakshi. For those who don't know, Ralph Bakshi is rather infamous for his line of adult-related movies and TV shows. When it comes to his animated works, though, it seems like there's a cult following of some kind for films like Fritz the Cat, Wizards, and Cool World. In that despite them being bad or not, they seem to fascinate fans almost as much as the unique style of animation that Ralph utilizes. As for Coonskin, well, given its content, we're bound to be hit by so much racism and propaganda that's inspired by the times it was created in. And even though Ralph considers this to be his best film, can we really say that for sure? Let's find out. I mean, if the hardcore kid can survive Fritz the Cat, how bad can this one be?
Okay, so given the fact that Media Hunter doesn't really address why people like Ralph Bakshi's work and dismisses his animated films as being bound by propaganda and racism, we're not off to a great start. Also, the idea that you're somehow prepared for the vocal racist satire after having watched Fritz the Cat and acting like that was the pinnacle of adult animation really does set the tone for a very limited viewpoint of this picture.
Well, that's one way of getting your attention. Have the movie tell you off and then tell some suicide fact while dropping the N-word. We're not even a minute in and they're already dropping it. I just can't imagine what the rest of the film will be like.
Okay, dude, Media Hunter, the film is called Coonskin, a title which relates to racism. It's directed by Ralph Bakshi, the director of Fritz the Cat, and you might recall that film opens with middle-aged construction workers bitching about their daughters while one of them pulls out their giant penis and pisses on a hippie. Given what you've seen with Ralph Bakshi's work, did you expect him to ease you into the racism that he chiefly aims to tackle with Coonskin?
That was Brother Rabbit. As smart as you are, he was. And as mean as you is, he is. Brother Bear. As big as he was, that's how strong he was. It's your fox. As wild as he was, that's how wild he was.
You were high while watching Looney Tunes, weren't you? Song in the South, actually.
This reference manages to be both astute and frustrating at the same time. Because yes, Coonskin is satirizing Song of the South in the sense that it is directly targeting the classic folk tales of Uncle Remus. The characters of Brother Rabbit, Preacher Fox, and Brother Bear are framed as exaggerated inner-city versions of Brer Rabbit, Brer Fox, and Brer Bear. Song of the South revolves around the 7-year-old Johnny being told animated tales of Brer Rabbit through Uncle Remus. Each tale is meant to serve as a lesson to Johnny. Brer Rabbit earns $1 a minute, teaches not to stray far from home. Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby teaches reverse psychology when getting out of sticky situations. And Brer Rabbit and his Laughing Place teaches how to outsmart your captors. Coonskin follows the same format, except instead of Johnny fleeing a plantation to get a story from Uncle Remus, the prisoner Randy escapes prison and gets his animated story from the fellow escapee Pappy. And the tales of Brer Rabbit are presented less as a fable for keeping your head down, and more as a blaxploitation about cutting heads off, reframing the Tar Baby more as a trap for the mafia than for the rabbit. Coonskin isn't just referencing Song of the South, but reframing and essentially reclaiming the folk tales of slavery origins and racist implications. This is an important aspect to recognize as it drives the entire narrative.
This film is more or less blaxploitation, so you gotta show off the bad in people.
Okay, that's a rather dim reading of blaxploitation. I'll just leave it at that. There's way too much to unpack from that statement.
The live-action bits just seem awkward when the characters are used and don't really fit in that well. Like, I think it would have been better just to animate everything, but instead they took the easy way out. As for the character designs, while they intended to be as gritty and iconographic as possible, there's this problem where black characters literally blend into dark backgrounds. Rabbit especially, since like others, he doesn't show an outline, so it's hard to tell what's part of his face.
I would argue this isn't really a problem. There are very few scenes in which the entire background is pitch black, and the deep black character designs will just disappear into them. The footage that Media Hunter is showing here doesn't really communicate that it's hard to read the facial features. Not to mention the live action does a great job just, stressing the realism and the grit, to showcase that, this isn't just a cartoon world. This is actually like reflecting a very gritty reality.
The way it's set up, it's supposed to be Pappy telling us about Rabbit and Gang. And yet for no reason, all this other stuff happens just because it can. It's like he would say, "Yeah, Rabbit and them brothers are something. Did you know the white man did this, blah blah blah." If they really wanted to show this stuff off, then they shouldn't have bothered with the jailbreak subplot, since then this movie could truly be blaxploitation that's more organized than a guy telling us random stuff. Bottom line, because the true plot is Pappy telling a story to pass the time before Crazy Man and Samson show up, Randy's gonna be here all night.
Again, recognizing Song of the South is key to understanding the framing of this film. It's rather adorable that this guy thought a Ralph Bakshi film was going to stick to a plot that didn't meander into exploring more societal themes. I mean, really, this is like watching a Terrence Malick film for the first time and being like, what's with all the voiceover narration? Man, the director really should have taken that out of the film.
So they go to this gathering of sorts where they learn that someone named Savior is posing as Black Jesus in order to start a revolution. Savior, as it turns out, is Fat Albert if he took nudity lessons from Family Guy. He's not seriously going to go out like that, is he?
You are black.
Screw it. Play the song.
And I'm gonna sing a song for you.
Setting aside that D-plus joke, Media Hunter doesn't really address what Simple Savior is doing in this scene. If Media Hunter didn't resort to the lazy gag of throwing the Fat Albert music over Savior's song and dance, he might have been able to recognize what the film is trying to say about religion. Savior's performance is an exaggerated display of black oppression meant to inspire his congregation to donate money towards his cause. It's a co-opting of the civil rights movement through the lens of religion and the drive of capitalism, as Savior declares himself endowed with the power to grant the ability to slaughter white people for the forthcoming revolution. if they pay him. Brother Rabbit's sabotaging of Savior's racket represents not just how easy it is to dismantle religious institutions, greedily feasting on Black Revolution, but how easy it is to stir up that same crowd. This is the start of Rabbit's rise in the ranks of organized crime, placing a target on his back for those previously associated with Savior. And Media Hunter mostly reduces it to just being a silly sequence with a fat black man while comparing the character to the only other overweight black cartoon character that he knows.
After another scene with Miss America, though this time it's more like a cutaway gag since Rabbit mentioned it, they end up at a bar.
Okay, stop. No, you can't do that. You can't take one of the most important scenes in Coonskin and just reduce it to being a cutaway gag. The scene in question features a black militant firing an automatic weapon at Miss America. After a few dozen bullets doing little to no damage, Miss America declares the revolutionary has won. Having caught this black man off guard, she presents herself with legs spread so that he can have his way with her. An invitation to the spoils of his victory. But the moment he moves in for sex, an unseen gun within her vagina fires off and kills the black militant. This is easily one of the most iconic and thematically essential scenes in the entire film. It is a pretty firm representation of how America itself will convince African Americans that they have won their war against America's racism, only to be attacked the moment that they let their guard down. Put down your weapon and you can have everything you have ever wanted, and before you realize you won't get anything out of this, it'll be too late to grab your gun. Racism isn't over in America, it just sleeps until there's a moment for it to strike. And Media Hunter only addresses this scene as a cutaway gag, a very, very disingenuous reading.
What is we doing in Reverend Simple Savior's Club after what's happened at the church tonight? You understand what I mean?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure, Fox. But something sure gonna happen.
Damn, Rabbit. I wish all this talking and screaming about revolution would stop.
I'm tired of trying to segregate, integrate, and masturbate anymore.
H.K. Duke, take
No,
down.
listen, the longer we wait, the longer we gonna end up like Malcolm and King did.
Yeah, I'll drink the
So I guess this means you'll be going for a more peaceful route without the violence? Nope.
Okay, I really don't know how Media Hunter thought this line of dialogue implied a peaceful route. The gang mentions that they don't want to end up like Martin Luther King, who did favor a peaceful solution, nor do they want to end up assassinated like the more militant Malcolm X. They also say that they're tired, not of the revolution, but the discussion about a revolution coming. They're impatient, and it seems pretty clear from this discussion that they want to take the violent path, essentially shooting first before they become targets. They don't want to preach, they want to attack. So yes, it's not a shock that this scene immediately leads into a knife fight, signaling that Rabbit and his gang will be more bite than bark.
Well, Fox takes this one girl they save away and isn't seen again until later in the movie. Bear takes on most of the guys in the club, while Rabbit ends up getting captured and taken to Savior, who's really working for a white guy. So is the revolution thing a lie after all, or are they just using each other?
Savior is clearly involved in a scam. He doesn't really foresee a revolution, he just wants money. Like organized crime, hence the goons. If the revolution comes, Savior won't be able to con more black people out of money for his cause. So no, Savior does not believe in a revolution that's coming.
And with that, this subplot is finished. And with it, another plot begins.
No, this isn't a subplot, it's the plot. Brother Rabbit kills Savior and takes over his business, leading into him gunning down associates of Savior. This is like looking at the scene in The Godfather of Michael gunning down Sollozzo in the restaurant and being like, well, that's the end of that subplot. Now, time for an entirely new plot about the 5 families going to war without anything connecting the 2 scenes.
Anyway, the reason Madigan is after Rabbit now is because he keeps getting his payoffs for all the cocaine that's being sold. But this leads to a trap where he suffers the ultimate act of humiliation. First, he gets distracted by boobs, drinks a spiked drink, where he gets taken to this guy who gives him sex?
Yes, that's clearly sex. I don't know why you hesitated here. It's pretty clear what's going on in that scene.
And then they inject him with something before turning him into the black-faced version of Bob from Fairy Tale. He ends up going insane as he thinks people are mocking him and monsters that are trying to kill him. Yeah, this film is on acid.
Okay, huge lack of context here. Madigan is displayed as a corrupt cop who is racist and homophobic, two aspects that are thrown back in his face. He's drugged into being seduced by a gay man and then forcibly dressed like a mammy in blackface. Under the influence of drugs, Madigan hallucinates the horror of becoming everything that he despises. It is the nightmares of the largest fears of a bigot eating him alive, inside and out. So there's a little more to this scene in the film instead of just, being on acid.
Anyway, after killing Cop Bakshi, he in turn gets killed. In overkill fashion, like, seriously, why waste bullets like that?
It's a cartoon meant to represent police brutality and how they use an excessive amount of force unjustly. Also, the cops are meant to be racist in this scene, right? You do know they're not trying to de-escalate the situation and only use a modicum of firepower, right? This is yet another case of a thematically dense scene representing racism and police brutality, and all Media Hunter can muster for this moment is counting how many bullets were fired?
Only one target remains, and that's the Godfather. I wish. No, this is the Godfather.
But they think you're too old to run New York. And they say that because of the Godfather ain't been able to stop at a black rabbit uptown, they think you're slipping.
Touche. No.
What the hell happened to you? My God, he is ugly.
Yeah, the ugly design is very much on purpose. Bakshi wanted to portray the Mafia not as aspirational heroes, but as disgusting and cruel monsters. He was pretty open about how he despised much of the hero worship that inadvertently came with the Godfather's success. So, no, you're not getting some dapper version of the Mafia in Bakshi's cartoon that clearly wants you to hate the Mafia's criminal tactics.
Sonny Boychik, the Godfathers decided I want you to shoot the rabbit.
Me? All these other brothers, why me?
Yes, one-shot old man we never see again. Why him? Heck, you'd think with the way this movie treats all the gay people, you would think one of them would go first, just to get them out of the way.
The character assigned to killing Brother Rabbit is Sonny, the eldest son of the Godfather. You know, how like in the Godfather movie, Sonny Corleone takes over for Vito. I thought this was pretty obvious given the name. I mean, Sonny even dies the same way he does in The Godfather by getting gunned down in his car. And if Media Hunter can't read the most obvious satirization going on here, it honestly doesn't surprise me that he can't dissect any of the other characters surrounding The Godfather in this movie.
For now, the wife gets the Godfather to dance, which leads to more trippy stock footage, before she decides to try and murder him because he's been trying to kill their sons. What?
The wife murdering her husband is a satirization of The Godfather and an overt angle that Bakshi wanted to stress. In the Godfather movie, Vito essentially gets his sons killed by involving them in his business of organized crime. Vito's wife doesn't really do anything about it. But for Coonskin, Bakshi gives the Mafia wife the chance to have her bloody revenge. I don't know why this is seen as confusing, especially since it occurs right after the death of Sonny.
This leads to the strangest death scene in the movie. Was that symbolic in any way? I want to know, because I seriously don't get it.
After being shot, the Godfather's wife turns into a fairy that progressively ages down until she is little more than a butterfly. She transforms into something beautiful and innocent that someone as ugly and vicious as the Godfather destroys with ease. And like most aspects of Bakshi's film, it's an extra dose of exaggeration to reflect the cruel nature of this harsh cartoon landscape. I didn't think it was that esoteric when I first watched the film, but maybe it is for cartoon critics like this guy?
Bear is offered the chance to take up boxing for the Mafia, which he reluctantly accepts since Pearl sways him into doing it. And apparently he ends up winning the World Championship. And the one to break it to Rabbit is Miss America. And all this just to make Rabbit feel betrayed and face him? Or is it because he's more successful than Rabbit after coming out of the gutter?
Up from the ghetto and shit like that? Hey, you can't let Bear get away with that. What are you gonna do about it?
Miss America is trying to stoke infighting within Black Americans. She wants Rabbit and Bear to fight each other instead of fighting the American system that keeps them down in the first place. After this, there's a musical sequence of Rabbit being goaded into fighting Bear by his associates. As they sing and encourage Rabbit, racist stereotypes start popping up amid dice and pool balls, symbolizing how Rabbit's revenge can make him easily manipulated into what Miss America desires and distract him from what is eroding the Black community. And how does Media Hunter interpret this scene?
Now you're just doing whatever the hell you want. Can't you just have a regular conversation? Well, that would be kind of boring in this case.
Not even going to try to decipher any of that scene, are you? At this point, I'm getting tired of Media Hunter just showing scenes and saying that they're trippy without making any greater observations about what the film is saying. So I decided to just skip to the end to see what his conclusion was.
And really? That's the movie, and to be honest, I kinda liked it. I mean, it's nothing I would see again, not like Meet the Feebles anyway, since this is way too raunchy, gritty, and controversial for me to really watch a second time, but it was still an interesting experience. The main three are interesting in their own right, Bear for his journey of self-discovery, Fox for his over-the-top performance and antics, and Rabbit for being a badass with funny lines here and there. They made the story more watchable since otherwise the only thing that kept me going was the visuals.
Media Hunter says he likes the film, but when going through what he likes about it, he mostly just says that he likes the characters. He does attempt to highlight the aspects of racism that make this film as relevant now as it was back in the mid-1970s. And yeah, it does hold up with its writing. Would have been nice if he actually covered those aspects instead of just giving a substandard play-by-play. I don't like how Media Hunter constantly reduces the narrative to being confusing and complaining about aspects that don't make sense in the film, but still arrives at the conclusion that the movie's pretty good. Something inside his subconscious is telling him that Coonskin is a good movie, but he can't find the words. He can't address the symbolism or follow the story all that well to fully grasp what makes this movie so effective. Okay, but this was an old review made well over a decade ago. Let's find something more recent from somebody bigger, like this video from Just Stop.
And believe it or not, up to release, this movie went through 0 unexpected mishaps.
Yeah, I know the history of the film. Anybody can look this up, but what did you think of the film?
Other projects he was working on got shelved. He got letters of invitation from Republican senators and the KKK thinking he'd made an anti-black film. It was a total shitstorm, and you want to know the worst parts? Coonskin is not a racist film. It's not an anti-black film. It's the complete opposite. Hell, for something made in the mid-70s, I don't think you could find a more progressive, revealing, honest film about racial inequality and exploitation if you tried.
I don't entirely agree on this point. While the film is blunt about racial inequality, it came out right in the middle of the blaxploitation era, which was loaded with many films addressing these topics. Bakshi's film certainly fits into that mold, and it is definitely daring for aiming to be a harsher satire than an overt tale of revenge. But there is a question of how much of that black experience that Bakshi is able to convey, despite growing up in black communities. It's a question worth exploring, given that the most notable blaxploitation film from this era, Shaft, was written by two white screenwriters. They ended up creating a black hero who spends less time investing in his community and more time trying to fit in with white people. So while Coonskin is a rather provocative and honest blaxploitation film, it wasn't the only blaxploitation doing this at the time. Additionally, I don't think it was as progressive as Just Stop seems to think that it was. The most controversial type of characters in Ralph Bakshi's films are the queer community. Gay and drag characters are presented in both Heavy Traffic and Coonskin, but with nowhere near as much thought as how Bakshi portrays characters who are Jewish and black. They're in his films long enough to become a sexual punchline and then be brutalized. It is somewhat progressive that Bakshi even presents the queer community at all, but it's definitely the most dated aspect. At one point in this review, Just Stop goes on a rant about how Core protested the film as being racist, sight unseen.
It was straight up admitted by all the people at Core that no one on the staff had watched the movie, at least no one important. They had gone on this whole crusade, did all the damaging shit they did to Bakshi's career completely on a whim against a film that stood with them. And Bakshi wasn't the only one saying it wasn't racist. He also got vocal support from the National Organization for the Advancement of Colored People, aka the NAACP, who, in a letter of support, called it a difficult satire after, get this, watching it. They had done what Core wasn't able to, but they still wouldn't budge for whatever reason, even after the facts were presented. They, as a civil rights organization, literally labeled something a certain way and enforced that label through violence judged exclusively on how it looked while disregarding evidence that showed they were the same. Does anyone else find that ironic? Because I think it's pretty ironic. Okay, I got a little heated there. Sorry about that. It's just, man, the fucking hypocrisy, dude. It's unreal.
Okay, I think that's a very simplistic way to view Core's reaction for the sake of a rant. Now, I don't think that Core was right in their unfair assessment of Bakshi's film by protesting it before it came out, but their fury didn't just come from nowhere. According to a museum staffer at the Museum of Modern Art, where Coonskin premiered, somebody within Core had apparently read the script and found it detrimental to the depiction of black people. And remember, this was the mid-1970s, and blaxploitation was becoming so prevalent that the black communities were starting to become more critical of the prevalent films that depicted them. And some organizations had a big problem with movies that were constantly portraying black characters in stereotype roles as pimps, drug dealers, and gangsters. Now couple that with the concerns of an animation style that evokes racist caricature and helmed by a white director and screenwriter, and it's not hard to see where the scrutiny lies on the surface level. Consider how easy it could be to misunderstand the film's caricature of being more intentional than satirical. I mean, Just Stop even brings up this aspect in his own video about Bakshi's intentions being misread. So I think there is some concern to be had that wasn't entirely unfounded. Think about how many people misread satire, even the most overt targeting of satirical storytelling. If Bakshi's aim was off just enough for racists to endorse the film, it wouldn't just be a brutal misfire, but provide ammo for the prevalence of racist movements. Thankfully, Just Stop does recognize Coonskin's perspective of framing Black America through the scrutinizing lens of white Americans.
It's directly throwing the country's long history of depicting negative black stereotypes back in the viewer's face to force them to confront it. And the narrative does all it can to reinforce that message through a story I'd call If Fritz the Cat Weren't a Phony and Decided to Gun Down All the Fakers Profiting Off Black Suffering.
Okay, I don't like this description. Fritz is framed to represent the way that white America struggles to integrate with the black community, offering up an allegiance that is more performative than proactive. Brother Rabbit is framed as a black man, reclaiming organized crime from racist cops, complicit black figures, and the ugly nature of the Italian mafia. I think that framing Coonskin as, what if Fritz wasn't himself and fought black oppressors, is like saying the film is like Taxi Driver if Travis Bickle were more progressive. See, this is an aspect that speaks more to the limitations of cartoon critics. Coonskin has a narrative that is very common to blaxploitation films, pulling storylines and characters from the likes of Black Caesar, The Black Godfather, and Hammer. But if you don't have that insight, all you can really fall back on is Ralph Bakshi's other films, especially when there are few other animated films to compare it with. Now, this review isn't bad. I mean, Just Stop does highlight more of the obvious symbolism in Miss America and the systemic racism that takes a more nuanced form in everything that works against Black America. He even declares Coonskin as Bakshi's greatest work, and that's all good stuff, but I feel like something is missing here. And to be fair, I found this review sandwiched between a longer video of Just Stop trying to cover all of Ralph Bakshi's work, so he might have just been reducing his analysis for time, but there are still a few blind spots in what he has covered here. As a Cliff Notes version of what makes Coonskin a great movie and what Bakshi was drawing from, this is a fine crash course in the movie. Yet, I feel myself longing for something more personal. I mean, a film meant to be this racially and socially provocative should elicit something more out of a cartoon reviewer than a recitation of history and mere dissection of the symbolism. And thankfully, I found some better reviews for Coonskin from other cartoon critics. Man of a Thousand Thoughts has some great insight into the nature of how both the writing and animation frame the complicated nature of revolution and historical racism that has shaped America. He relates it to everything from the real-world struggles to the trails blazed for similar cartoons like the Boondocks. This review by Animat is also pretty refreshing for how he doesn't shy away from associating Coonskin with more recent politics. He attributes the racism stoked by Republicans as an ongoing effort and associates Savior's grifting with the anti-woke culture war grifters of today. I could go through these videos, but I don't have any notes for them. I mean, they're great. They engage with the film on a deeper level and are not afraid to share more of their personal feelings about what made this movie resonate with them. If I were recommending reviews to sell someone on what makes Coonskin a great movie, I'd point to those two videos. But I only found these videos by Man of a Thousand Thoughts and Animat after browsing through various Ralph Bakshi reviews that were all relatively the same in nature. Like, they all have the same stuff, you know, a repeat of stating the production history, a play-by-play of the entire plot without much commentary, a misreading of the themes, a recount of the adult situations, and a refusal to understand the symbolism, and so on and so forth. There tends to be this cry within the cartoon criticism community that animation is cinema, meant to reinforce how it's a medium not specifically bound for children. It's a sentiment that I do agree with, given the history of animated films clearly aimed for a level above adolescence, but if animation really is cinema, comparable to more adult movies, we should be able to discuss cartoons on that level as well. And part of that greater critique is going to involve going outside of the usual comfort zone for how animated films are approached. It's why Saberspark has no problem talking about the disappointing nature of Kung Fu Panda 4, or which Disney film was a box office failure, but struggles to find much of anything to say about Heavy Traffic. Animation is cinema, but it can't just be a phrase. You have to treat it as such so that the audience can notice Fritz the Cat, Heavy Traffic, and Coonskin as more than just Ralph Bakshi's X-rated cartoons. Otherwise, the commentary on these essential films will be so vapid and drowned out by discussions of Shrek, Toy Story, Despicable Me, SpongeBob SquarePants, Puss in Boots, Paw Patrol, Trolls, Inside Out, Minions, Moana, Hotel Transylvania, Sing, Frozen, The Angry Birds, Spider-Verse, My Little Pony, Madagascar, Transformers, How to Train Your Dragon, B-Movie, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Winnie the Pooh, Rugrats, Powerpuff Girls, Pokemon, Hey Arnold, Rocko's Modern Life, Doug, The Emperor's New Groove, Goofy Movie, Aladdin, The Lion King, Snow White, Cinderella, Ferngully,